High fuel prices are making vacations and traveling a ghost story in and of themselves. However, I've gathered legends, tales, and stories from each state, starting with 5. Spooks, ghouls, shapeshifters, and cryptids alike lurk just beyond our backyards and our forest. Join me as I embark on a new journey into the paranormal as we visit some of America's creepiest and purportedly true legends. Tales of man-eaters, spirits that kidnap, and cryptids so terrifying you'll be happy you're in the safety of your home. Pop some popcorn, dim the lights, and pull the covers tight, and join me as we take you into the hair-raising tales of Cryptid America, a tour of the 50 states and their allegedly true stories. First up on today's list is Alabama, the Wolf Woman of Mobile. Described as pretty and hairy, the Wolf Woman of Mobile is reported to live in the woods and swamp areas of Mobile, Alabama. The top portion of her body is purportedly that of a human, but the bottom half is all wolf, right down to her very paws. And in 1971, over 50 reports have flooded the local paper with sightings of the mythical creature. The story goes that in April 8th, 1971, the Press Register took several eyewitness accounts, and over 50 calls had flooded their phone lines to report that this anthropomorphic creature was stalking the marshes and woods of Mobile. Police began receiving the same type of calls on April Fool's Day, an American day known for practical jokes. A teen was quoted as saying, "My dad saw it down in a marsh and it chased him home. Now, my mom keeps all the doors and windows locked tightly." Being as the initial sightings began on a day meant to prank people, not much credence has paid initially. However, when over 50 calls were received in less than a week, officials and news outlets alone started paying attention to each reported sighting of the cryptid. Since the flood of calls back in 1971, no other sightings of the beautiful creature have been reported. What were the people of Mobile seeing? Was it really a creature that was half human, half woman, or was this simply a prank? Well, one thing is for certain. For over a week, police and local media were busy investigating each and every sighting and documenting them for future generations to ponder over. Alaska, the Kalupalik. In the deep waters of Alaska, there is a legend of a sea creature that hums a song so angelic and hypnotizing that it lures people willingly to their deaths. The Kalupalik is described as human-like except for her long fingernails and hair and skin that is as green as the water she is said to inhabit. She also wears a mautic. This is a pouch worn by women of small babies that fits close to the body, holding the child in place, freeing up the mother's hands to do chores while still holding the baby. The legend goes, the Kalupalik needs children to keep her youthful and her hair special. She stills children to either have as her own or to keep her striking appearance as well as her green skin. The people of small villages throughout Alaska would warn their children to be good, or the Kalupalik would hum her alluring song, drawing the children close enough to a body of water so she could take them into her amautic and return to her home in the icy depths of the sea to raise the child as her own or consume them to retain her beauty. In 1892, Angie and Philip were cousins who spent their days playing in the village. Parents warned the young boys to not wander near the water, lest they be taken by the Kalupalik. At first, the boys were scared by the tales their parents had told them to keep them from misbehaving, but soon, the temptation to play by the water was too strong. And inch by inch, the boys would get braver and closer to the water, and soon, they forgot all about the warnings of the sea creature and got lost in games of tag and looking for unique shells on the beach to see which could find the prettiest one. One day, Angie was running from his cousin and being right at the water's edge, took a few more steps, completely submerging his feet in the most forbidden of places. Before he knew what was happening, he was being pulled into the cold, murky depths by the Kalupalik. Philip saw his cousin's feet disappear into the water and ran as fast as he could back to the village to tell his parents what had happened. The adults had gathered and went out in boats to search for the missing child, but after a week, there was no sign of the boy. Philip had slept by the sea, waiting for the Kalupalik to return his cousin that he missed so very much. This is what the evil creature wanted. The more Philip was sad, the happier she was. And Angie's father should have been getting ready for hunting season, but all he could think about was his missing son. The memories was driving him mad with grief. One morning, the father, so overcome with sadness, could no longer sit and do nothing. He donned his best hunting clothes and grabbed his gear. As the man made his way through the village, people were thinking hunting season had begun, but this father was another type of hunt for his son. Canoe in the water, Angie's father rode into the horizon, and days turned into weeks, and villagers began to worry that they had lost both the father and son to the Kalupalik. They would gather daily at the shore, keeping watch, just hoping to see a canoe returning to the village. Well, after weeks had passed and the villagers began going on about their business, hunting and fishing for the season, when one day, Angie and his father had returned. The man had succeeded in rescuing his son from the clutches of the monster that stole him, and soon, tales of the harrowing rescue circulated all through the village as people began to whisper the details of each other. The father had battled hard with the creature and in the end was victorious. The boy returned to playing with his cousin, and this time, Angie had listened to his parents as they reminded him to stay away from the water. Villagers knew, though, it was just a matter of time before another child would wander away from the village and into the water. The Kalupalik would take them, for her eyes never blink. She was always watching, always waiting. Was Kalupalik the creature that took Angie, or did he journey another way to the island where he was found? Why did the other villagers give up so fast on finding the young boy? Arizona, El Chupacabra. Arizona is steeped in history of many cryptids, ghosts, haunted forest, superstitious mountains, and long abandoned mines, not to mention a very dark past. And possibly no tale is scarier than one of the El Chupacabra. Stories of this vampiric dog monster begin in Puerto Rico around 1994, when a farmer supposedly found several of his livestock animals completely drained of blood and several precise surgical wounds about their bodies. With a name that literally translates in Spanish to goat sucker, ranchers in several southern U.S. states began to fear for the safety of their livestock. Necropsies performed by licensed veterinarians caused more questions than provided answers. Most stated that the wounds were cauterized as they were being made, meaning that the animal was being cut open by an instrument or device hot enough to burn the skin as the animal was being excised. And soon, tales of more animals with similar wounds and ultimate fates were being reported farther north into the U.S., specifically the southwestern states like Arizona, New Mexico, California, Nevada, and Texas. The bodies of animals that had suffered attacks by the El Chupacabra were largely left untouched, except for the blood and a few of the strange surgical opened and burned areas. Arizona had perhaps one of the strangest cases with an investigation that lasted for over a decade. In 2007, a cattle rancher in the Pella area of Arizona. He had purchased several ranches and the cattle, making his ranch one of the largest in the state. A Mr. Dean, a name changed to protect anonymity, began to notice that a few of his cattle were now missing. Retrieving some supplies and a horse, Dean had made his way across the main ranch to try and find the missing cattle, as a few were about to give birth. After 3 entire days of searching each area, the animals liked to wander off to and coming up empty-handed. Dean was beginning to think that someone had either stolen the cattle or they had gotten out of the fenced area. He needed to start making his way back to the ranch house the next morning. After a good night's sleep and some breakfast, Dean got back on the trail leading to home. A light rain had been falling all morning, a rare treat for the desert area where he lived, but today, it was making for a rough trip back. To get home and shave some time off the trip, he would need to cross a wash, which under normal circumstances wouldn't be an issue, but since the light sprinkle had now turned into a full-blown torrential downpour, the wash would be unpredictable at best. He had to try, though. Arriving at the area, Dean could see the wash was running fast, but with confidence in the horse he was on, he decided to cross where he was. Water was up to the middle of the horse's legs, but they made it across and continued towards the homestead. The smell then hit Dean's nose long before he came upon the bloated body of the first cow. It was one of the pregnant heifers that was missing. Doing a quick scan before dismounting from the horse, he could see several of the missing cows scattered throughout the area. And Dean's first thought was wolves or even a mountain lion. Sometimes they will kill more than they could ever eat and revisit the carcasses over several days. But this was different. These cows were intact, for the most part, save blood in precise open areas that looked like clean cuts as opposed to tears from predatory animal teeth. Dean looked at the first cow and made a mental note of the area where they were found and what the cuts looked like. There was not a single drop of blood to be seen. However, that made Dean shiver a bit. What kind of animal could have caused such blood loss and made surgical-grade incisions without leaving any evidence behind? There were no tracks and no instruments that a human could have possibly used to make the wounds either. To make sure, Dean searched a 2-mile radius around the dead cattle, and there was nothing. No tracks, shoe prints, nor blood. It was quite baffling, and one best suited to be figured out with an autopsy. As soon as he returned home, Dean wasted no time calling the large animal vet he had been using since moving to Arizona. He told her what he had found and how long the cattle had been missing. She assured him that she would be out the following morning, while the next day, the pair set out on horses to reach the area where Dean had found the cows the previous day. The vet had brought specimen bags and tubes to collect what she could. Maybe they could figure out what happened to the cows and why or how they ended up where they were, in the condition they were in specifically. As she made her way from cow to cow, something seemed off. She asked Dean to verify the cows were indeed pregnant. Yes, they were and about to give birth, which is why he had been eagerly looking for them in the first place. Well, there was definitely a problem because all the fetuses were missing from every cow. Now, the search was on for the calves. The mystery deepened when, after a full day of searching the entire area with the help of 5 other hands, nothing was found. The veterinarian collected samples of tissues and other organs, but there was even a problem with those. Some of the cows were missing teeth, hair, an eye, a heart, a lung, reproductive organs, and even a tail. Given the cows were already deceased and insects will almost immediately start feasting on a carcass, this was different. None of these cows had any insect activity, and it was in the middle of June. The veterinarian was perplexed and said she had never seen anything like it in the 27 years she had worked as a veterinarian. With that, she left the ranch with the samples and promised to get back to him as soon as pathology reports came in. Several weeks had passed, and Dean had other cattle, sheep, fowl, and horses to attend to. The mystery of the cow vampire had commandeered much of his time for days after the freakish discovery, but since then, he had busied himself with the other chores that needed done before winter months hit. The call he had been expecting came on a Saturday evening. The veterinarian asked if she could come over. Dean agreed. When she arrived, she looked as though she had aged at least 5 years. Her features looked tired. Dean wanted to get down to business and ask what it was that was so prudent that she had to drive all the way out to him with information she could have easily given to him over the phone. It was still very much a perplexing case, and she told him that there were more questions than answers. The incisions that she sampled were done with cauterizing instruments, and there wasn't a drop of blood in any of the animals that she tested. There was also no foreign DNA found in any of the cuts she tested. This was truly a mystery. The samples were kept in case there was something in the future to compare them to. Now, a few years after the massacre, as it was come to be known by Dean, he began hearing about an animal, a cryptid rather, that caused similar injuries to farm animals, just like the ones he had seen on his cows. El Chupacabra was what people were calling it, and there were stories on the news outlets about the same type of cuts and blood loss on other ranchers' herds. This was the only logical but truly insane determination that Dean could reach. With research and discussing his experiences with other ranchers that had similar incidences, Dean found himself believing that his cattle had indeed died by the hands, or fangs, of the El Chupacabra, even though he wasn't one to give in to flights of fancy. It was the only answer. And since learning of the goat sucker and what the monster can do, Dean learned to keep his animals close to the homestead and be on the lookout for the next visit from this vampire. He would be ready. Arkansas, the White River Monster. In the late 19th century, authorities in Newport, Arkansas started hearing about a beast seen in the White River. The White River Monster, or Whitey, as the locals would eventually name it, is described as a serpent-like beast with a bellowing call, having a spiny backbone and grayish, crusty, leathery skin. The creature was so loved by the locals that in 1973, the legislature signed a bill geared to protect Whitey. Per the bill, it is illegal to molest, kill, trample, or harm the White River monster while he is in the retreat. The protected area is a large portion of the river where most of the sightings have taken place. Now, around 1921, a young brave from the Quapaw Indian Reservation that is nearby was fishing the river from his canoe. What was thought to be an attack by Whitey saw the boy thrown from the canoe into the water, and sightings after that were a bit spotty until 1937, where a farmer would make a claim that would bring more attention to Whitey. Bramlett Bateman owned a farm close to the White River. Bateman had made several claims to have seen Whitey several times, saying the animal rises to the surface in the late afternoons and floats or swims around 5 to 15 minutes with its head underwater. Bateman tried to make the sightings a business, and for a short time, he charged 25 cents for a chance to see the monster. He also sold soft drinks and sandwiches to customers. Nobody ever reported seeing Whitey from Bateman's farm, but in 1966, 3 men reported seeing him on the river swimming. They described it as having a monkey-type head, flippers like a dolphin, and a mermaid tail. A few years went by before there was another sighting. Then, in 1971, 2 men out for a hike found 3-toed tracks and brush pushed over like something heavy had been to the area. This was the same year a logger by the name of Cloyce Warren claimed to have snapped a picture of Whitey. The picture and repeated sightings prompt the Arkansas State Legislature to create the refuge for the local celebrity cryptid. A local biologist thought that Whitey might be an elephant seal that had wandered up the river and somehow became trapped, becoming the legend. Others think that the Whitey is a cryptid that should be protected. Either way, Whitey hasn't been spotted in years, prompting people to think he may have died when the water in the refuge became too shallow. However, most people think it is still alive and out there, waiting for an unsuspecting fisherman or logger to see it swimming in the right river waters. Was the monster a wayward elephant seal, or was it as the people had said, a monster? The state of California and the Dark Watchers. In the state of California, there are many unexplained phenomena that is shrouded in mystery throughout the entirety of the state. In the Santa Lucia Mountains, people have reported seeing dark figures to what they call Dark Watchers. This has gone back as far as the 1700s. The name was given to the figures because of their silent demeanor while staring at the night sky. They are described as black in color, standing around 10 feet tall, and can be seen on mountainsides observing hikers. They are said to never bother people, but just observing people venturing into the woods. Settlers in what is now known as Santa Lucia, California, that hunted the forest of the area talked about the Dark Watchers. Standing completely still while gazing into the twilight sky, these entities are motionless and featureless. It seems as though they are quiet while observing people venturing into the forest. There haven't been any more reports of the Dark Watchers harming anyone. However, people do report feeling as though they are being watched by these shadowy figures. And in 1938, John Steinbeck wrote an article called Flight, in which he describes that Dark Watchers are a type of humanoid figure that wear a brimmed hat, long flowing cloaks, and can stand from 8 to 15 feet tall. They observe people walking in the forest, but no reports have been recorded of any attacks from these supposed beings. John and his wife, Sarah, had just moved to California less than a year after they'd been married. John accepted a job as a programmer, and Sarah was accepted into a nursing program at a local college. Both were the outdoorsy type, which is how they had originally met. They had been on vacation at Custer State Park, each with a group of friends that were there to see Mount Rushmore. Under the Walk of Flags, Sarah had dropped her research papers, and John, standing nearby, saw her and, while helping her retrieve the papers, had introduced himself. That was 2 years ago, and although they lived in different states, they had begun dating. After a year of frequent flies to their respective hometowns, the pair quickly married, deciding to settle in California. It was a few months before John was able to take a couple of days off, and knowing these breaks from his new job were precious, it didn't take long for him to convince Sarah to join him in a trip to the Redwood National Forest for a camping trip. Sarah recalled how beautiful the drive was, far removed from the San Francisco lights and pollution, and living in a large city. The first 2 nights were uneventful as the couple took short hikes, fished, took pictures, and even visited several spots. On their last night, Sarah suggested they camp away from their main camp, out in the national park, so she could take a few more pictures before they had to leave the next day. They took the bare minimum supplies on the hike. John had their small tent and water filtration, while Sarah was in charge of their snacks and her camera. There was a small ridge that looked like they could have a nice viewing spot of a valley. She motioned for them to make the peak of the ridge, and by the time they had arrived and set up camp, it was getting dusk. Sarah dolled out a few of the apples and granola bars, and on a semi-full stomach, decided to try taking a few nighttime snapshots. John was a few steps behind Sarah, so when she abruptly stopped, he ran into her, causing both of them to fall over a scrub oak bush. John asked Sarah why she had stopped so suddenly, and all Sarah could do was point from where they sat on the forest floor. And just a few hundred yards away was a tall, slender figure in what seemed to be an old duster coat and hat that covered the thing's head, obscuring any other features. The wind picked up, and the duster seemed to swirl about the dark figure. Sarah raised her finger to her lips in a slow gesture to John to remain quiet. However, it was too late. The dark figure slowly turned and looked right in their direction. This made Sarah let out an almost deafening scream before she could catch herself. The pair sat and stared in the thing's direction as if in a long-distance battle of a staring contest. The dark figure stared right back. John stood, pulled Sarah to her feet, and her legs felt like jello, left in midday August sun. She steadied herself against her husband, and before they began to run, the figure turned its attention back to the night sky. John pulled Sarah back to the trail, and the pair made their way back to the main camp without a word. Now, as soon as they were packed up and in the safety of their truck, Sarah was the first to break the silence when she had asked John what the heck had they just seen. The figure was too tall to be human. There was a very distinctive quietness that befell the forest, as they can now recall. The only noise that was made was when the wind blew through the trees. There were no animal sounds. Having arrived home, Sarah decided to investigate the thing that they had seen. Surprised by her findings, she shared with John what the being possibly was. A dark watcher, she told him. Apparently, they are harmless and just observe people in the forest. Although none of the research she had done said anything about dark watchers hurting humans, it did little to make her feel any less afraid of going camping again. As of now, in 2022, Sarah and John have not been back to the national parks, and they still reside in the state of California. But more importantly, what do you guys think? Did you guys enjoy today's episode? If you did, be sure to let me know what you think in the comments down below. And if you're new to the channel, be sure to go ahead and hit that big ol' red subscribe button because I release content on the mysterious and supernatural. As always, guys, I love you all, keep an open mind, and I'll see you guys in the very next episode.